The message flashed across Jax's phone screen, stark and terrifying in the dim light of the clubhouse garage. "He's shouting again." Just 5 words, but they carried the weight of a collapsing world. Jax didn't need to ask who he was. Every patch-wearing member of the Bandidos MC knew. He was Robert Maxwell, and the girl who sent the text was 10-year-old Lily, trapped inside a house of nightmares. For the rest of the world, the Bandidos Motorcycle Club was a collection of outlaws, the definition of bad news, riding chrome and thunder down the highways. They were the ones the cops watched, the ones parents warned their kids about, the ones whose very presence whispered of trouble. But outside the clubhouse walls, in the quiet, desperate corners of this town, they had a different, unadvertised reputation. They were the last line of defense for the defenseless, a shadow shield for those abandoned by the system. Lily's older brother, a mechanic who worked for the club under the table, had reached out weeks ago. A desperate plea slipped between oil changes. He spoke of the shouting, the breaking glass, the terror in his little sister's eyes, all thanks to his mother's abusive, unpredictable boyfriend, Robert. The police had been called, but Robert always had an excuse, a clean story, a fear-laced silence from the witnesses. He was Teflon, untouchable by the bureaucracy of child protective services and neighborhood watch committees. But the Bandidos don't operate on bureaucracy. They operate on a code older than any law book: protect the weak, fight the predator. And right now, Robert Maxwell was the predator. Jax pocketed the phone, the cold metal a reminder of the urgent reality. He didn't need to shout for attention. The deep, guttural revving of his Harley-Davidson Fat Boy was enough. It was a signal that traveled through the concrete floor and up the legs of every man in the garage. They stopped what they were doing, tools laid down, poker hands abandoned. They knew that sound. It meant the ride was urgent and the cause was righteous. Slick, the club's enforcer, a man whose face was a roadmap of bad decisions and hard living, was the first to stand up. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, were alight with a focused, almost paternal fury. He didn't ask where they were going. He just started pulling on his gloves. Across the room, Hoss, the club's sergeant-at-arms, a mountain of a man who could easily tear a phone book in half, was already swinging his leg over his bike. They moved with a silent, practiced efficiency, an organized chaos that few outsiders ever witnessed. This wasn't about turf wars or drug runs. This was about a little girl named Lily. Jax took the lead, swinging his massive bike out onto the street. The phrase in the title, "Bandidos MC turned their bikes," isn't just a description of a maneuver. It's a statement of commitment. They were turning away from the darkness that defined their reputation and riding straight toward the light of a single, desperate need. One by one, the motorcycles roared to life, a chorus of controlled thunder that shook the quiet suburban night. The sound wasn't menacing tonight. It was a promise. It was the sound of help arriving, the only kind of help that the official channels couldn't stop. They rode through the sleeping town, a squadron of black leather and polished steel. Every flash of chrome reflected a single, unwavering purpose. They didn't use sirens. They didn't need them. Their collective presence, the sheer, undeniable gravity of their bikes, commanded attention. As they approached Lily Street, Jax held up a hand, and the roaring engines instantly dropped to a low, powerful purr. They rolled in like shadows, their movement careful, respectful of the neighbors' fear, but relentless in their pursuit of justice. The house was unremarkable, a typical two-story on a quiet cul-de-sac. But through the front window, they could see the quick, violent movements of Robert Maxwell, his silhouette large and threatening against the soft living room light. The "shouting again" text wasn't an exaggeration. Robert's voice, thick with alcohol and rage, was clearly audible even from the sidewalk, a sound that made every Bandido's blood run cold with the memory of their own difficult pasts. This wasn't about simple noise. It was about abuse, pure and simple. Jax gave a curt nod to Slick, who dismounted with the grace of a trained fighter. Slick moved toward the front door, not intending to knock, but to provide a distraction. Hoss and 2 other brothers moved quietly around the back, their mission clear: secure the child. The Bandidos MC might be outlaws, but they understood the rules of engagement. No unnecessary violence, no property damage beyond what was required for entry, and the child's safety was the absolute priority. Their reputation might be forged in fire, but their actions tonight were being forged in the quiet desperation of a 10-year-old girl's text message. The stage was set. The outlaws were about to become the cavalry. The first block ends here, with the tension at its peak, the heroes in place, and the confrontation about to begin. The noise inside the house suddenly spikes, a crash of something heavy, followed by a child's short, sharp cry of terror. Jax takes a deep, steadying breath. It's time to go to work. The roar of the engines had faded, replaced by the beating of hearts and the sound of justice about to be delivered. The line between good and evil, always blurred for the Bandidos, was tonight razor-sharp. The child's cry, that short, sharp sound of pure fear, snapped the carefully managed silence. It was the ignition switch for the Bandidos. Slick didn't hesitate. He kicked the front door with a practiced, brutal force that shattered the lock and sent the frame flying inward. The immediate sound of the door crashing against the interior wall was a sonic declaration of war on the tyrant within. Inside, Robert Maxwell froze mid-tirade, turning to see the hulking figure of Slick filling the doorway, backed by the sheer, intimidating presence of Jax. The air immediately thickened with adrenaline and malice, but not from the Bandidos. They were surgical in their intent. Robert, red-faced and drunk, started to stammer, his abusive courage instantly dissolving into panicked fear as he realized these weren't the police, these were the kind of men the police warned them about. He took a stumbling step back toward the kitchen, instinctively looking for a weapon, any equalizer against the wall of muscle and leather, now invading his control. Jax didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His eyes, cold and steady, conveyed the entire message. The game was over. While Robert was locked in a staring match with Slick, the plan's second, crucial phase unfolded in the back. Hoss, using his massive frame, easily dislodged the back screen door. He entered the house with a softness that belied his size, his focus solely on the mission, finding Lily. He moved through the dimly lit hallway, guided by the faint glow spilling from the living room and the memory of the floor plan they had meticulously reviewed. Hoss was a man who had seen the worst of the world, but the fear of an innocent child was a sound that always cut him to the core. He found Lily huddled in a small linen closet, her small body trembling, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. Her eyes, wide and terrified, reflected the chaos of the past hour. Hoss crouched down, making himself small, accessible, and non-threatening. He didn't rush. He spoke in a low, gravelly voice, the kind of voice usually reserved for giving orders, now softened into a calming rumble. "Hey, little warrior, it's Hoss. We're the good guys tonight. Your brother sent us. We're taking you for a ride, okay?" Lily, recognizing the name of her brother's friends, the men her brother said were bad but safe, slowly nodded, tears streaking her dirty cheeks. In the living room, the situation was contained. Robert Maxwell, realizing the men weren't there for a fight, but for a targeted extraction, tried to assert his authority, shouting about trespassing and calling the police. Slick simply blocked the path to the front door, a granite wall that couldn't be argued with. "You can call whoever you want, buddy." Slick's voice was low and devoid of emotion. "But by the time they get here, you're going to be talking to an empty room, and she's going to be safe." The beauty of the Bandidos' intervention wasn't in their physical power, though that was undeniable. It was in their psychological presence. They weren't reacting to his anger. They were preempting his violence. They were using their outlaw reputation as a tool for justice. The threat of what they could do was often more potent than what they actually had to do. Just as Robert lunged toward the phone on the wall, the back door opened again. Hoss emerged, gently carrying Lily, wrapped securely in his arms. The sight of the child, small and fragile against the backdrop of the towering outlaw, was the final punch. Robert faltered, his rage suddenly undercut by a flicker of reality. He saw the cold, determined resolve in Jax's eyes and knew that any further obstruction would cross a line that even he didn't want to cross. The silence in the room was absolute. broken only by the soft whimper of Lily clinging to Hoss's patch-covered vest. Jack stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Robert's, a slow, deliberate movement that spoke volumes. He didn't need to touch him. He simply leaned in and spoke a final warning, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "You stay away from her. You hear me? If you ever raise your voice, or your hand, or your breath near this girl again, you won't need the police. You'll be begging for them, understand?" The sheer, unfiltered menace in the statement was enough. Robert just nodded, a beaten man facing a justice system far more immediate and unforgiving than the courts. Hoss carried Lily quickly out the front door, past the waiting brothers. Each bandido averted his gaze, respecting the child's dignity, but the collective sight of their formidable presence was the final, indelible image meant for Robert Maxwell. They weren't leaving him untouched. They were leaving him with the terrifying knowledge that he was being watched, eternally, by the shadows he feared most. They mounted their bikes, not in a rush, but with purpose. The engines roared back to life, not as a sign of aggression this time, but as a celebratory anthem of safety. Lily, nestled securely on the back of Hoss's bike, shielded by a brother assigned just for her safety, looked back at the house, then up at the stars. The thunder of the Bandidos MC was now the sound of her rescue. The outlaws had delivered the rescue the law couldn't. The procession of Harley-Davidsons thundered away from the quiet street, leaving behind a bewildered neighbor or two and one very terrified abuser. For Lily, the sound of the bikes was no longer noise, it was rhythm, a powerful, steady heartbeat carrying her away from the darkness. Hoss, riding carefully with Lily positioned safely on his back and secured by a safety harness, and another brother riding alongside for extra protection, headed straight for a safe house. This wasn't some pre-planned official shelter. It was the home of Sarah, a former school counselor and current confidential affiliate of the Bandidos MC, known only to the core chapter. Sarah's job was to provide comfort, stability, and most importantly, anonymity. She specialized in bridging the gap between the club's rough justice and the need for gentle, consistent care. Lily's immediate needs were simple: a warm blanket, a quiet corner, and the reassurance that the shouting was truly over. When they arrived at Sarah's suburban home, the sudden quiet was almost deafening after the roar of the bikes. Hoss gently lifted Lily down, her small hand still clutching the bear and now clutching a handful of his leather vest. He didn't rush her. The rest of the Bandidos stayed outside, engines idling low, a perimeter of protectors. They understood that their image, the patches and the rough edges, needed to be kept at a distance to avoid overwhelming the child. Only Jax and Hoss followed Lily inside, their movements careful not to chip the porcelain tranquility of Sarah's home. Sarah, a woman with kind eyes and a steady, non-judgmental demeanor, immediately took charge. She didn't question them. She just offered Lily a glass of warm milk and a quiet invitation to sit on a plush sofa. She represented the soft landing the Bandidos were incapable of providing themselves, but were dedicated to ensuring. The immediate relief was palpable. Lily wasn't just safe, she was seen. She began to talk, slowly at first, recounting the escalating fear, the broken objects, and the crushing weight of having to pretend everything was okay. Jax and Hoss listened, their faces impassive, yet their silence conveyed a deep respect and a solemn commitment. This wasn't about filing a police report which could drag the trauma out for months or years. This was about immediate, decisive intervention and ensuring the predator would never pose a threat to her again. That was the Bandidos' style of justice, direct, permanent, and fiercely loyal to the victim. Once Lily was settled and starting to drift towards sleep, Hoss called her older brother, who was waiting anxiously at a pre-arranged safe location. Hearing his sister's voice, small and sleepy but clearly safe, brought the older boy to tears of profound relief. The Bandidos weren't just saving Lily, they were saving an entire family from the spiral of abuse. Jax and Hoss stayed just long enough to ensure Sarah had everything she needed. As they walked back outside to their waiting brothers, the air felt different. They were still outlaws, still rough around the edges, but they were also the only force in the town capable of delivering this kind of swift, unconditional protection. Their motorcycles, roaring back to life as they left Sarah's street, carried more than just men. They carried the collective weight of a mission completed. They had turned their bikes toward danger and rode away carrying a rescued innocence. The club would now ensure Robert Maxwell understood the full, irreversible consequences of his actions without ever having to touch him again. Their constant, menacing presence in the background of his life would be his prison. The outlaws had truly become the cavalry, proving once again that sometimes the true heroes are the ones wearing the most intimidating patches. The story of the Bandidos MC is one of complex duality, feared by the law, yet revered by those the law forgets. They are the shadows that fight the darkness.